She thought she was bringing him dinner. She brought herself a funeral instead. Charlotte Hayes stood frozen outside a penthouse door in downtown Chicago, Italian takeout cooling in her hands, listening to the man she had loved for 3 years explain to his friends exactly why he would never marry her, not hesitating, not lowering his voice, laughing. The word temporary hit her somewhere below the ribs and didn't stop moving. She didn't scream. She didn't knock. She set the food bag down quietly against the baseboard, pulled the promise ring off her finger, placed it on top, and walked to the elevator without looking back. That was the night Charlotte Hayes stopped being someone's convenience and unknowingly became the reason two powerful men would go to war. If this story already has you gripped, hit that like button right now, drop your city in the comments below, and let's see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because this is only the beginning. The elevator doors closed and Charlotte watched her own reflection stare back at her from the polished steel panels. She looked the same. That was the absurd part. Same dark coat, same hair she had spent 40 minutes on that morning, same tired eyes she had been masking with concealer since the end of a brutal work quarter. She looked entirely like a woman who had just picked up food from Carmine's on Michigan Avenue and was heading up to surprise her boyfriend. Not like a woman whose entire understanding of the last 3 years had just been surgically removed through her chest. The lobby hit her with cold air and the indifferent noise of a Friday evening. A doorman nodding at someone leaving, a couple arguing quietly near the revolving glass entrance, heels clicking on marble. Charlotte walked through all of it without registering any of it. She pushed through the door, hit the sidewalk, and the November air slapped her face like it had been waiting. She kept walking. She had no destination. That was the honest truth she would not admit to herself for another 4 blocks. That she had absolutely nowhere to go because she had spent 3 years quietly reorganizing her life around a man who had apparently never reorganized anything around her. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. Preston's name lit the screen. She stared at it long enough to read it twice. Then she let it go dark. Her apartment, the one she had given up 8 months ago to move closer to his neighborhood, the one she had been paying month to month on before finally letting the lease die, was gone. Most of her things were in his second bedroom closet, what Preston called her overflow space, which she had understood at the time as generosity and now understood as something else entirely. Her name was not on his lease. Her name was not on anything that mattered in that building. She had $312 in her checking account until the 15th, a work laptop in her bag, and a half-charged phone with a man's missed call on the screen. She stopped at a crosswalk on Wabash and stood there while the signal cycled twice without moving. Temporary. He had said it the way men said things they had already decided were obvious. Not cruel exactly. Almost bored. One of his friends, she recognized the voice as Derek, Preston's college roommate, who had always looked at her like she was a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the room, had asked when Preston was planning to make things official. And Preston had laughed first. The laugh came before the words. That was the detail she could not dislodge. The laugh meant the answer had always been ready. It had been sitting there fully formed, waiting for someone to finally ask the question. I'd rather die were the exact words. Then he had explained, still laughing, that Charlotte was the kind of woman you kept around during the building years. Loyal, low maintenance, beautiful enough to bring places, but not the woman you built the actual future with. That woman, Preston had said, was a different category entirely. The crosswalk signal changed. Charlotte crossed the street. She called Madison from the corner of Wabash and Monroe, standing under the orange glow of a street lamp with taxis cutting through the intersection and her breath coming out in short, visible clouds. Madison picked up on the second ring. Hey, are you already at his place? Did he freak out about the surprise? Charlotte opened her mouth. What came out was not words. It was something more structural than that, a sound that started in the back of her throat and arrived fully formed as 3 years of careful, quietly maintained composure breaking apart in public under a street lamp on a Friday night. Charlotte, Madison's voice shifted immediately, all the lightness gone. Where are you right now? Tell me exactly where you are. Madison Carter lived in a third-floor walk-up in Lincoln Park that smelled permanently of coffee and the lavender candles she burned in every room. It was a small apartment by any reasonable standard. 1 bedroom, A bathroom with a cracked tile above the sink that the landlord had been promising to fix for 2 years. A kitchen where two people could not stand side by side without bumping elbows. Charlotte had always found it a little cramped whenever she visited. That night, it was the most welcoming space she had ever walked into. Madison met her at the door in sweatpants and an old Northwestern hoodie, took one look at Charlotte's face, and pulled her inside without a word. She made tea that Charlotte didn't drink, wrapped her in a blanket that smelled like fabric softener, and sat on the couch cushion closest to her without touching her until Charlotte was ready to be touched. That was the thing about Madison that Charlotte had never fully articulated but had always known. She understood the geometry of grief. She knew when to move in and when to hold still. Charlotte told her everything in fragments, not in order. The food, the elevator, the laugh, temporary. The promise ring left on top of a takeout bag outside an apartment door. Madison listened without interrupting. When Charlotte finished, there was a silence that lasted about 4 seconds. "He said he'd rather die," Madison repeated. "Yeah, then marry you." To his friends, laughing, another silence. Madison picked up her own mug of tea, looked at it, set it back down. "I want to say I'm shocked," she said carefully, "but I think what I actually am is furious that it took him this long to show you clearly what he's been showing you blurry for 3 years. Charlotte pulled the blanket tighter. "That's not helpful right now." "I know, I'm sorry." Madison shifted on the cushion. "You can stay here. Obviously, you're staying here. I'll move the boxes out of the closet in the morning, and you can have the bedroom, and I'll take the couch until we figure something out." "I'm not taking your bedroom." "You're taking my bedroom. We'll argue about it tomorrow when you have the energy to actually fight me on it." Madison reached over and pressed her hand once, firmly, over Charlotte's. "Tonight, you just stay." Charlotte nodded. Her phone had buzzed 6 more times since she left the building. She had not looked at it again. She turned it face down on the coffee table and left it there. The next several days moved in a texture she could not properly describe to anyone who had not lived it. Not exactly pain, not exactly numbness, but something in the borderland between them. A low-grade static that made ordinary things feel translated from a language she hadn't fully learned. She went to work because not going to work was not a financial option. She answered emails. She sat in meetings and contributed to conversations, and apparently did it convincingly enough that her manager complimented her turnaround on a client brief. She ate when Madison put food in front of her. She did not cry again after that first night. The well had gone dry almost immediately, which disturbed her more than the crying had. She had expected more grief, louder grief, the kind of grief that announced itself and demanded to be witnessed. Instead, she got this flat, gray, functional endurance that felt less like healing and more like the body doing what bodies do when the mind can't keep up. Preston called 14 times in the first 48 hours. He texted more than that. She read none of it. On the 3rd day, she blocked his number with the same mechanical efficiency she used to cancel subscriptions, and felt almost nothing doing it, which told her something she hadn't been ready to hear about the true temperature of what she had been calling love. Madison, to her credit, did not push her toward processing anything before she was ready. What Madison did instead was, on the 6th evening, sit across from her at the small kitchen table over takeout containers and say in a very particular tone, the tone she used when she had already decided something and was presenting it as a suggestion purely as courtesy, "There's a gala next Friday night. The Hargrove Foundation benefit at the River North Gallery. Victoria Chen from my firm has a table and she gave me 2 seats because her husband can't make it." Charlotte looked up from her low mane. "No. You haven't been anywhere in 6 days. I went to work. Work doesn't count. Work is survival. I'm talking about living." Madison leaned forward. "You don't have to talk to anyone. You don't have to be charming or perform being okay. You put on a good dress, we go, we eat food someone else cooked on actual plates, and we leave whenever you want. I don't want to be in a room full of people I don't know pretending I'm fine. You've been in rooms full of people you don't know pretending you're fine for 3 years. At least this time you'll have an open bar." Charlotte looked at her for a long moment. Madison looked back without flinching. "1 hour," Charlotte finally said. "I'll stay 1 hour." "2," Madison countered immediately. 1 hour is just arriving and leaving. 2 hours is actually being somewhere." "Fine. 2 hours. The River North Gallery on a Friday evening was the kind of room that reminded Charlotte why she had always had a complicated relationship with Chicago's money. Beautiful, certainly. Vaulted ceilings, warm lighting against exposed brick, a string quartet positioned near the east wall, playing something understated that no one was listening to. Tables dressed in white linen and low centerpieces. Women in gowns that cost more than Charlotte's monthly salary. Men in suits that had been custom fitted to bodies that spent time with personal trainers. The whole thing smelled faintly of wealth, a combination of expensive perfume, good wine, and the particular absence of financial anxiety. Charlotte wore the black dress she had bought for a colleague's wedding 2 years ago and told herself it was fine. Madison's colleague, Victoria, was warm and easy to talk to, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a talent for steering conversation away from anything uncomfortable. The table was good, near the perimeter, which meant Charlotte could watch the room without being fully in it. She had a glass of wine that she sipped slowly and carefully because she had not eaten much that day and could not afford to come apart in public. She was doing fine. She was actually doing fine. Then she felt someone looking at her. It was not an aggressive feeling, nothing threatening. More like a shift in the air pressure of the room, the specific sensation of held attention. Charlotte glanced across the open floor toward the adjacent table arrangement and found the source with an efficiency that startled her. Damien Moretti was watching her with the particular stillness of a man who had already decided he was allowed to look. She knew who he was. That was the terrible convenience of it. 3 years in Preston's orbit meant 3 years of peripherally knowing everyone in Preston's orbit, and Damien Moretti had always occupied a specific and quietly uncomfortable place in that social geography. He was Preston's oldest friend. They had grown up 3 blocks apart in a part of Chicago that didn't produce many men who ended up in velvet-roped rooms on Friday nights. Damien had taken a different route than Preston, a far more dangerous one, and the result was a man who stood at charity galas in an impeccably cut dark suit while carrying a reputation that most of the people in this room whispered about and none of them would say to his face. He was 36 years old. He ran a criminal organization that controlled significant portions of Chicago's port logistics, certain real estate holdings, and several other concerns that no one discussed in polite company. He had been investigated twice by federal agencies and charged with nothing. He had 3 men standing at various positions around the perimeter of the room who Charlotte was now fairly certain had not paid admission. He was also, and this was the part Charlotte had always quietly filed away and never examined, one of the most composed human beings she had ever been in the same room with. Not cold. Something more deliberate than cold. The kind of stillness that came from a man who had learned very early that showing your reaction was a form of surrender. She looked away first. 30 seconds later, Madison touched her arm. Damien Moretti is walking over here. I know, Charlotte said. Does that require any kind of warning system from me, or I'm fine? She was not entirely fine. He arrived at the edge of their table with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been told no, and therefore had no physical memory of bracing for it. Up close, he was taller than she remembered, broader through the shoulders. The suit was charcoal, the tie a shade darker. He had a drink in one hand, and he wasn't offering to shake anyone's hand, which Charlotte noted as interesting. Most men in rooms like this led with the handshake, the status-establishing grip. Damien just arrived and stood there as though his presence was itself sufficient introduction. Charlotte, he said. Not a question. Damien. She kept her voice level. I didn't know you'd be here. The Hargroves owe me a favor, he said. The economy of it, the total absence of social lubricant, was somehow both off-putting and clarifying. He wasn't performing anything. You look like you're deciding whether to leave. I've been here 40 minutes. I said I'd stay 2 hours. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. Recognition of something, maybe. I heard about Preston, he said, and the room immediately felt smaller. The string quartet was still playing. It seemed suddenly very far away. Charlotte kept her posture level. She had been maintaining her posture as a form of survival for 6 days. Did you? He called me. Damien's eyes stayed on hers. They were dark and extremely direct, the eyes of a man who had been in enough genuinely dangerous situations that social discomfort had been burned entirely out of his register. Told me his version. I'm sure he did. I didn't believe it. The directness of that landed somewhere she hadn't expected. She picked up her wine glass and took a careful sip, buying herself 2 seconds. That's between you and him. He said you left without a word. No explanation, just disappeared. Damien tilted his head slightly. That's not the Charlotte Hayes I've observed for 3 years. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you well enough to know you don't run from things without a reason. You run with reasons that other people can't argue with. He said it without flattery, the way someone states observed data. Which means whatever the reason was, it was airtight. Charlotte set her wine glass down. Across the table, Madison was doing a very good impression of someone absorbed in conversation with Victoria, but Charlotte could see the angle of her attention. I appreciate you coming over, Charlotte said, with the specific politeness that communicates the opposite of appreciation. But I'm not having a conversation about Preston tonight. Damien looked at her for another moment. That stillness again. Then he nodded once, which was somehow more unsettling than an argument would have been. Fair enough, he said. Can I sit down for 5 minutes to talk about something else entirely? She should have said no. She had every reasonable justification for saying no. She was 6 days out of a 3-year relationship conducted with this man's closest friend. She was not in the emotional condition to be navigating someone like Damien Moretti, and she had promised herself tonight would be 2 hours maximum, followed by takeout on Madison's couch. 5 minutes, she said. He pulled out the empty chair across from her and sat down. He stayed for 45 minutes. What he talked about in the first 5 was the gallery itself, a specific piece on the east wall. A large abstract canvas in deep blues and grays that he said he had considered buying last year but didn't because his building's lighting would have flattened it. He asked if she had noticed it when she came in. She hadn't. He described it in a way that was neither showy nor trying to impress her. He just described it the way someone describes something they have actually looked at. It opened something. She wasn't prepared for it. By 10 minutes, she was telling him that she used to paint in college. Nothing serious, nothing that led anywhere, just oil on small canvases in a studio apartment she shared with 2 roommates who complained about the smell of the turpentine. She hadn't thought about that version of herself in years. She didn't know why she was telling him. By 20 minutes, the conversation had moved somewhere more difficult, into the territory of what it was like to want a version of your life and spend years building carefully toward it, only to find one day that the foundation was never real. She did not mention Preston by name. She didn't need to. Damien listened in the same way he did everything, with his full, unperformative attention, not filling in her silences with reassurances or nodding at intervals to demonstrate engagement. He just listened until she finished, and then he said something that stopped her. You were building toward something real. He just wasn't building toward it with you. Those are 2 separate failures, and only one of them is his. She stared at him. What does that mean? It means you don't have to decide that what you wanted was wrong because the person you wanted it with turned out to be. He held his drink loosely, looking at her without urgency. The wanting was legitimate. You can keep that part. Charlotte looked away across the room. The string quartet had shifted to something slower. Most of the tables around them had thinned slightly, people drifting toward the bar or the gallery exhibits. 3 years, she said quietly. Not to him, really. To the air. I know. I gave 3 years to a man who kept me around because I was convenient. She heard her own voice say it and felt the words land for the first time in a way they hadn't yet, not even with Madison. There was something about saying it in this specific room to this specific man, this dangerous, still oddly honest man, that stripped away the last of the protective framing. I wasn't a priority. I was a placeholder. Damien didn't rush to comfort her. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He said, yes. The honesty of that one word hit her harder than any consolation would have. She looked back at him. You knew, she said. It wasn't an accusation, more like a recognition. I saw things I didn't have the right to say. You could have told me. With what justification? I was his friend. The words were flat, carrying their own accountability in them. That was a line I didn't cross. I'm not certain I made the right call. Charlotte studied him. This man she had spent 3 years keeping at comfortable, polite distance because something about him had always unsettled her equilibrium in ways she preferred not to examine. She had always attributed it to his reputation, to the low-frequency awareness that he was genuinely dangerous in ways Preston only ever performed. But sitting across from him now, in a near-empty section of a gallery on a Friday night in November, she understood it had never been his danger that made her keep distance. It had been the way he paid attention to her, like she was worth paying attention to. "I have to go," she said. She said it before she could talk herself out of it, because staying longer felt suddenly like a door she was not certain she should walk through yet. Maybe ever. Damien didn't try to stop her. He stood when she stood, which was the kind of unconscious courtesy that men either had or didn't, and said, "It was good to see you, Charlotte." She picked up her clutch, looked at him for one last second. "Thank you," she said. "For the honest parts." He nodded. That was all. She found Madison already standing by the coat check because Madison had been watching the entire 45 minutes and had read the room exactly correctly. They left without ceremony, walked out into the cold November night, and got into a cab heading north. Madison lasted approximately 4 minutes before she said, "So?" "Don't. I'm just observing." "Madison." Silence for another minute. "He looked at you," Madison said carefully, "like you were the only person in a room with 200 people in it." Charlotte stared out the cab window at the city lights blurring in the rain-slicked streets. She did not answer because she did not have an answer that was entirely safe to say out loud. She had noticed, too. The first text came 2 days later. She didn't have his number saved. The message arrived as an unknown contact at 11:15 on a Sunday morning while she was sitting at Madison's kitchen table with coffee and her laptop, trying to concentrate on a work report. "I thought of something else about that painting. If you want to hear it, no obligation either way." Charlotte read it 3 times. She typed back, "How did you get this number?" His response came in under a minute. "Madison. I asked her permission first. She said, quote, 'It's about time,' and sent me your contact." She looked up from the phone. Madison was in the living room on the couch, pretending to watch television. "Madison." "Hmm?" "You gave Damien Moretti my phone number." He asked very nicely. "He runs a criminal organization. He also clearly sees your worth, which is more than we can say for the last candidate." Madison glanced over the back of the couch with an expression of complete innocence. "And he asked my permission first, which, for the record, no man in your life has done in recent memory." Charlotte looked back at her phone. She typed, "What about the painting?" His reply, "The light in that gallery was wrong for it. I went back and looked again. The piece deserves north-facing windows, not the warm spots they have it under. It changes the whole emotional register." She sat with that for a moment, then, "That's a specific thing to think about. I pay attention to what deserves attention." She set the phone down, picked it up, put it down again. Madison was watching her now without pretending not to. "This is a terrible idea," Charlotte said. "Historically, terrible ideas are the ones that change things," Madison said. Charlotte picked up the phone and typed, "Tell me more about the painting." What followed was not what Charlotte would have called pursuing. It was more like the careful accumulation of evidence. Text messages that were never aggressive, never pressuring, never performing charm in the way she had learned to recognize charm as a form of sales technique. Damien Moretti communicated the way he did everything, with the expectation that what he said had value and no apparent anxiety about whether she agreed. He was funny in an arid way that took her off guard the first few times. He recommended a documentary about port architecture that turned out to be genuinely compelling. He asked her once, after she mentioned offhandedly that she had not painted in over 4 years, why she stopped, and when she gave him the easy answer, "Busy, life, you know how it is," he responded, "That's not why. Try again." Nobody spoke to her like that. She tried again. The real answer was more complicated, said something about having spent years slowly subordinating pieces of herself she considered impractical to a version of adulthood that Preston's social world implicitly required. She hadn't noticed it happening. That was the thing. It had been gradual enough to feel like growth. Damien's response to the real answer, "The cost of that is expensive and usually invisible until it isn't." She read that message on a Tuesday afternoon in a work bathroom and stood there for longer than was professionally appropriate. 3 weeks after the gala, he asked her to have coffee with him. Not dinner, not a drink. Coffee, in the afternoon, at a small cafe on the river that she had passed 100 times but never been inside. She said yes before she had fully processed saying it. The cafe was quiet in the way places are quiet on weekday afternoons, mostly empty except for a few people working on laptops, and a barista who treated Damien with the specific deference of someone who had been well compensated to be discreet. They sat at a corner table with the river visible through wide windows, gray and cold under a November sky. He was different in this setting than at the gala. Not in the ways that mattered, but in the smaller physical registers. Less formal. He had his jacket off by the time she arrived, sleeves of his dress shirt turned back once. He looked like a man who had been somewhere before here and would be somewhere after, which she supposed was accurate, and who had carved this specific window of time deliberately. They talked for 2.5 hours. She stopped tracking the time after the first 40 minutes. He asked her about work, not politely but specifically, about a project she had mentioned offhandedly 2 weeks ago, wanted to know how it had resolved. She told him. He asked a follow-up question that demonstrated he had actually retained what she said, not just the surface but the subtext she had barely articulated. Nobody had ever done that to her before, paid the kind of attention to her words that turned them back into something more precise than she had initially offered. She asked him, somewhere past the first hour, what it was actually like. Running the thing he ran, not the public architecture of it, not the rumors she had absorbed over 3 years, the actual texture of it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, it's lonely in specific ways that are difficult to explain to people who aren't in it. And there are moral costs I pay without pretending they aren't costs. That's a more honest answer than I expected. You asked an honest question. Most people in your position don't answer honestly. Most people in my position aren't talking to you. She looked at her coffee cup. Something about the warmth of the room, the river outside, this man sitting across from her being entirely, carefully, deliberately present. It was doing something to her defenses that she had been maintaining out of sheer structural necessity for nearly a month. She looked up. Why me, Damien? Out of a room with 200 people? He held her gaze without flinching. Because you're the only person in any room I've been in for years who I actually wanted to talk to. That's not an explanation. No, he agreed. It isn't. He set his coffee down and she saw something move in his expression. The first thing she had seen him not fully contain. I've been watching you settle for less than you're worth for 3 years. I didn't say anything because of Preston, and I'm still not saying not yet. Not 3 weeks out. He paused. But I'm here, Charlotte. I'm sitting here. That's me saying something. The river moved outside, gray and constant and not caring about any of it. Charlotte's heart was beating in a way she recognized but had not felt in a very long time. Not the anxious heartbeat of trying to be enough for someone. Something steadier than that. Something that felt like being seen. Okay, she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow slightly. I'm here too, she said. That's also saying something. He almost smiled. The almost smile, she was starting to understand, was as much as Damien Moretti gave a room. But his eyes, dark and direct and extremely awake, gave the rest of it. She drove home alone that evening in an Uber, watching the city scroll past her window in the early dark of a late autumn afternoon, and thought about what it meant that the most honest conversation she had experienced in years had been with a man who operated entirely outside the rules she had organized her life around. She thought about what Madison had said, it's about time. She thought about the painting in the gallery and north-facing windows, and the way light changed what you were looking at without changing the thing itself. Her phone lit with a message from an unknown number she now had saved under a single name. I'd like to do this again. She typed back without hesitation, yes. She was staring at the city lights and not letting herself examine how long it had been since anything felt that uncomplicated when the second message arrived. Charlotte, Preston knows we had coffee today. She went very still. The Uber moved through traffic. The city carried on. Somewhere across Chicago, in a penthouse she had left a month ago, a man who had described her as temporary was learning that the woman he discarded had been sitting in a quiet cafe by the river with the one person in his world he had always unconsciously understood as the greater version of himself. Her phone buzzed again. Preston's number, or rather, the number she had blocked, coming through now from a different line she didn't recognize. You need to stay away from him. I'm warning you. Charlotte looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. To the right number, to the one name she had saved. How angry is he? Damien's reply came in seconds. Angry enough that you shouldn't be in Madison's building tonight. I'm sending someone. Her mouth went dry. She looked out the window at the streets, now seeing them differently. Not the ordinary city she navigated every day, but something with more layers. A city where the rules she had believed in were not the only rules operating. She had known, abstractly, what Damien Moretti was. She was beginning to understand, concretely, what it meant to be standing anywhere near him. Her phone buzzed a third time, this one from a number she didn't recognize at all. 4 words. You made a mistake. The Uber pulled up outside Madison's building. The driver said something about having a good night. Charlotte looked at the entrance, the lit lobby, the doorman she recognized from a dozen previous visits, and thought about whether going inside was the right decision. She was still thinking about it when a black SUV she had not noticed pulled up to the curb behind the Uber, and a man in a dark jacket leaned out the window and said her name, Ocham. The man in the dark jacket said her name the way people said names when they already knew the answer and were only checking that you did too. Charlotte Hayes. Not a question, a confirmation. She was still half inside the Uber, one foot on the curb, her clutch pressed against her ribs. The driver had gone quiet in the particular way civilian people went quiet when something in the air changed register without warning. The black SUV idled behind them, exhaust curling up in the cold. The man leaning from the window was mid-30s, broad through the neck, wearing a jacket that fit poorly over whatever he was carrying underneath it. His eyes moved from her face to the building entrance and back in a single sweep. Mr. Moretti sent me, he said. I'm Marcus. Charlotte looked at him. She looked at the building. She looked at the street in both directions the way she had never once looked at a street before in her life. Not scanning for cabs or landmarks, but for something else. Something she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. But her body apparently did, because her pulse had moved into her throat. I don't know you, she said. No, ma'am. But he said you'd say that, and he said to tell you, north-facing windows. She exhaled. She turned back to the Uber driver and said, thank you, which was an absurd thing to say under the circumstances, but her manners were apparently still functioning even when the rest of her operating system was struggling to keep pace. She got out. She walked to the SUV. Marcus had already come around to open the rear door, and she got in without fully deciding to, operating on the animal logic of known danger versus unknown danger, and choosing the one that had, so far, shown her only honesty. The interior smelled like leather, and something faintly chemical she chose not to identify. The seats were warm, the partition between the front and back was down, and Marcus got in the driver's seat and pulled into traffic without asking where she wanted to go, which told her Damien had already given the destination. She called Damien. He picked up on the first ring. You're in the car. Where are you sending me? Somewhere safe. Temporary. A pause. She could hear movement in the background, the low ambient noise of men conducting business in another room. I'm sorry. I didn't anticipate he'd move this fast. You said angry enough that I shouldn't be in the building. What does that mean specifically, Damien? What is he actually capable of? A silence that lasted one beat too long. Preston doesn't get his hands dirty, Damien said, but he knows people who do, and he's been drinking since this afternoon, which means his judgment is running about 40% of normal. Another pause. He won't hurt you. I need to be clear about that. He won't physically put a hand on you, but he'll make noise. He'll show up. He'll make sure you understand that you belong to him in his mind, and he'll do it in whatever way causes maximum disruption. I don't belong to him. I know that. You know that. His voice was even, but she could hear something underneath it, something contained and very cold. He hasn't caught up yet. Charlotte looked out the window at the city moving past. Madison's alone in that apartment. I sent someone to her too. She knows. I called her first. A beat. She said, and I'm quoting directly, finally somebody's doing something useful. Despite everything, Charlotte felt something almost like a laugh move through her chest and dissolve before it reached her face. Where are you? I'll be where you are in about an hour. There are some things I need to handle first. She understood, in a way she couldn't have 24 hours ago, what handle meant in the context of Damien Moretti's vocabulary. She wasn't sure how she felt about understanding it. An hour? she said. An hour. His voice dropped a register, something in it that wasn't command or reassurance, but something between them. Charlotte, I'm sorry this is your first real look at what my world costs. She watched the Chicago streets give way to a part of the city she knew less well, the buildings changing character, the lights different. Don't apologize, just get there in an hour. She hung up and sat in the warm dark of the SUV and breathed slowly and deliberately, the way her body needed to in order to stay ahead of the fear. The apartment Marcus took her to was on the 14th floor of a building in the West Loop. Clean, simply furnished, the kind of place that had been made comfortable without being made personal. No photographs, no accumulated objects. A kitchen with food already stocked. A window that faced east, the city glittering out there in the cold. It was the apartment of a man who maintained several addresses and used each one for a specific purpose. And Charlotte understood without being told that this one existed exactly for situations like this one. She sat on the couch without taking her coat off for about 10 minutes. Then she took her coat off and went to the kitchen and made herself a cup of tea because doing something physical with her hands was the only thing keeping the panic from fully inflating in her chest. She thought about the text she hadn't answered. You made a mistake. She turned the phone over in her hands, set it face down on the kitchen counter, and drank her tea standing up because sitting down felt like surrendering to something. Damien arrived in 53 minutes. She heard the door, a key in the lock, unhurried. And then he was there, still in the dress shirt from earlier, jacket back on. He looked at her in the kitchen, the mug in her hands, her coat on the back of the couch, and his expression did something complex that resolved quickly back into the controlled stillness she was learning to read around the edges. You okay? He said. Not a question this time either, but different from the man in the car. He was checking, not confirming. I'm functional, she said, which is the honest version of okay. He came into the kitchen, not close, not crowding her. He stood at the opposite counter and looked at her steadily. Preston went to Madison's building. Building security and my man were there before he got past the lobby. He paused. He made some noise, left after about 15 minutes. What kind of noise? Damien's jaw moved. He told the security desk that you were mentally unstable, and he was there out of concern. That you'd stolen from him. That you were in a dangerous situation with a dangerous man, and he needed to locate you for your own safety. Each sentence came out flat, stripped of affect, which made them hit harder than if he'd editorialized. He named me by name, Charlotte set her mug down on the counter. He said I stole from him. Yes. 3 years, she said quietly, and with a precision that was more frightening than volume. 3 years of my life given to that man. I didn't take a single thing from that apartment except my own clothes. I left the ring he gave me. She stopped. The anger was clean and hot, and she let herself feel it fully because it was the first unambiguous thing she had felt in a month. He is unbelievable. Yes. That's all you're going to say? What would you like me to say? I don't know, something more than yes. Damien looked at her for a moment. Then he said, he's afraid. Men like Preston. Men who have spent their whole lives performing a version of themselves that requires an audience. When the audience walks out, they don't grieve. They escalate. He folded his arms, not defensively, just settling into the truth of what he was saying. He's not acting out of love. He's acting out of exposure. You leaving means someone got out before he could frame the ending. Charlotte absorbed that. You've been watching him for a long time, she said. He's been my closest friend for 22 years. Something crossed his face. Not sentiment exactly, but the acknowledgement of weight. I know exactly who he is. I've been knowing who he is and making a choice about what to do with that knowledge for a very long time. And now? Now it's different. He said it without drama, without theatrics. Because now it's you. The apartment was very quiet. The city moved outside the east window, indifferent and luminous. Charlotte picked her mug back up, held it. What happens tomorrow? Tomorrow he wakes up sober and recalculates. He'll probably go quiet for a few days. Damien watched her carefully. The noise campaign comes later, social, mutual contacts. His version of events packaged to make you the villain and him the wronged party. A pause. Are you prepared for that? I haven't done anything wrong. That's not always the relevant variable. She looked at him. Are you telling me to walk away from whatever this is before it gets worse? He held her gaze steadily. I'm telling you the cost. What you decide to do with the information is yours. That was the moment. She understood it clearly even then, standing in a stranger's kitchen with a mug of tea going cold in her hands. That was the moment she decided she was not walking away. Not from him, not from this, not from any version of her own life that she was now in the process of reclaiming from the wreckage of 3 years of being someone's placeholder. She was done making herself smaller to fit inside other people's definitions. She set the mug down with a definitive click. Tell me what prepared looks like, she said. Tell me what I need to know. Something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or the confirmation of something he had already suspected about her. Sit down, he said. I'll tell you everything. He stayed until 2 in the morning. They sat at the kitchen table and he talked, not comprehensively, not laying out everything, but enough. Enough for her to understand the shape of the world she was adjacent to. Preston's connections were social, financial, image-based. His power was the power of a well-curated reputation in a city where reputation was a form of currency. He had investors who valued his public profile. He had a family name that carried weight in certain philanthropic circles. And he had a reflexive, deeply ingrained need to control narratives, which meant that right now, in whatever room Preston Calloway was sitting in at 2 in the morning, he was not drinking and grieving. He was building a story. Damien's power was of a different kind entirely, and he did not pretend otherwise. He told her the shape of it plainly, the things he controlled, the people who worked for him, the places where his influence operated, and the places where it had limits. He told her what protecting her would look like, and what it would cost in terms of the life she had been living, the social ecosystems she had been part of. He did not make it sound romantic. She appreciated that enormously. What he did not tell her was what she would not understand until later, was how long he had already been managing the specific problem of Preston's relationship with her from the outside. The number of times in 3 years he had said something, carefully, that redirected Preston from a decision that would have been cruel. The specific night, 18 months ago, when Preston had done something Charlotte would likely never know about, and Damien had made very clear the parameters of what he would and would not allow. He did not tell her any of that because it was not the night for it, and because there were things a person needed to discover in order, rather than all at once. What he did tell her, at 1:45 in the morning, when the tea was long cold, and they had both moved to water and the city outside had gone down to its late-night frequency. I've wanted to have an honest conversation with you for 3 years. Charlotte looked at him across the table. Why didn't you? Preston. Just Preston? He held her gaze. And because honest conversations with you would have cost me things I wasn't ready to pay until now. She understood what he meant. She filed it carefully. Get some sleep, he said, standing. I'll have Marcus outside. You're safe here. I know, she said. And then, because it was true and because she was done holding things back from herself. That's new. Feeling that. He paused at the edge of the kitchen, looked back at her. It shouldn't have taken this long, he said quietly. He left. She heard the lock engage. She sat at the kitchen table for another few minutes in the silence of a city at 2 in the morning, thinking about what it meant to feel safe, thinking about what it had taken to get here, and thinking about what happened to people who stepped fully into the orbit of a man like Damien Moretti. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in a month. 3 days passed in a strange suspension. Charlotte went back to her regular life, Madison's apartment, her work commute, the ordinary mechanical rhythm of the city. Preston went quiet, as Damien had predicted. The threatening text was not followed by others. The unknown number went dark. Madison reported no further incidents at the building. Charlotte found herself waiting for the other shoe. It dropped on a Thursday. She was at her desk at 11 in the morning when her phone screen lit with a name she had not seen in nearly 2 years, Catherine Reeves, Preston's cousin. A woman who had always treated Charlotte with the warmth of someone managing her instincts toward open hostility. Hey, Charlotte, can we talk? In person. It's about Preston, and I think it's important. Charlotte stared at the message for a long time. She showed it to Madison over lunch. Madison read it, set the phone down, ate a bite of her salad, and said, He sent her. Probably. Catherine Reeves has never once voluntarily reached out to you in 3 years. She skipped your birthday dinner twice and told Preston she had a conflict both times. Madison pointed a fork in the direction of the phone. He is running a play. I know he is. So you're not going to meet her. Charlotte picked up her own fork. Put it down. I think I have to. Madison looked at her. Why? Because if I don't, it looks like I'm hiding, and I'm done hiding from things. She picked up the phone. I want to know what version of events he's selling. Catherine Reeves chose a wine bar in River North for the meeting, which told Charlotte everything about the framing Preston intended, a civilized, semi-public conversation among adults, on territory that favored the performance of reasonableness. Catherine was already there when Charlotte arrived, sitting at a high top near the window in a camel coat with a glass of white wine she was working through with focus. She was 32 and had the specific Chicago polish of a woman raised with the understanding that appearances were architecture. She was objectively beautiful in a way that had always made Charlotte feel subtly evaluated in her presence. She stood when Charlotte arrived. Thank you for coming. The warmth in her voice was a performance Charlotte could now see the machinery of clearly. Please sit. Do you want wine? I'll get you a glass. I'm fine, Charlotte said. She sat down and did not take her coat off, which was a physical statement she was aware of making. Catherine, what do you want to talk about? Catherine settled back onto her stool. She picked up her wine glass, turned it once. She was deciding how to begin. Charlotte could see the calculation happening. And then she made her choice. I'm worried about you, she said. Charlotte said nothing. I know things ended badly with Preston, and I'm not here to relitigate that. Catherine tilted her head, something earnest and carefully constructed moving through her expression. Charlotte, I've heard things about you and Damien Moretti, and I care about you too much not to say something. What have you heard? That you've been spending time with him, that you might be... A pause, textured with performed reluctance. I need to ask you directly. Are you involved with him? Charlotte looked at her. Why is that your concern? Because he is not a safe person. Catherine leaned in slightly. I don't mean his reputation. I mean specifically. Preston knows things about Damien that you don't. Things he never shared with you because he was protecting the friendship. And now that you're... She stopped. I'm just asking you to be careful. For your own sake. Catherine. Charlotte kept her voice level, her hands still on the table. Preston sent you here. A pause. He didn't send me. He asked me as family to... He asked you to come and tell me that Damien is dangerous, and Preston has information that could change my mind. That's the message. Charlotte watched the other woman's face move through its micro-adjustments. What's the information? Charlotte, if you have something real to tell me, tell me. I didn't come here to watch someone deliver someone else's lines. Catherine's expression shifted, the warmth cooling, something more honest and less flattering rising to the surface. She set her wine glass down. You want real? Fine. She leaned forward. Preston is telling people you walked out on him because you were already involved with Damien, that it was an affair. He's got 3 people, 3, who he says will corroborate a timeline. Charlotte felt the cold move through her. That's a lie. I know that, Catherine said it quickly. I'm not saying I believe it. I'm telling you what he's building. Because by next week, Charlotte, it's going to be everywhere in this city. Every circle you've both been in, every contact, every colleague who knows both of you. She held Charlotte's gaze. He's going to make you radioactive. And he's going to do it publicly enough that even people who like you won't want the drama of standing beside you. The wine bar moved around them. Someone laughed at the bar. A jazz track played low from ceiling speakers. Charlotte breathed through her nose, slowly. The way Damien breathed in difficult rooms, she had noticed it without naming it, and now she borrowed it. Why are you telling me this if you're on his side? I'm not on his side. Catherine's voice dropped. For the first time, it sounded like a real voice. I love my cousin, but what he's doing is wrong, and I'm not comfortable being the person who delivers it with a smile and calls it concern. She picked up her wine glass again, not drinking, just holding. I thought you deserved to know what's coming. Charlotte looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded once. Thank you for the honest part. She stood. She put her coat on. She hadn't taken it off. She picked up her bag. Charlotte, Catherine's voice stopped her. What are you going to do? Charlotte looked back at her from the edge of the table. The answer she gave was not the one she had walked in with. It was the one that had formed somewhere between the wine bar door and this moment, shaped by 3 years and a month, and the cold knowledge of exactly what was standing in front of her now. I'm going to stop being afraid of what he tells people, she said. That's what I'm going to do. She walked out into the November cold and called Damien before she was halfway down the block. He picked up immediately. Catherine, you knew about the meeting. I knew he was building something. I didn't know the delivery mechanism until about 40 minutes ago. He's manufacturing a timeline, an affair narrative, 3 witnesses. She was walking fast, her breath visible, her heels sharp on the pavement. He's going to burn my reputation in every circle we share. A silence on his end. Not the silence of a man without a response. The silence of a man deciding which of his available responses to give. Come to me, he said. Damien, not because of this, not to strategize. His voice was quiet and direct. Just come. I want to see you. She stopped walking. The wind moved through the street. People flowed around her on the sidewalk without noticing her. She was standing at the exact center of the point of no return, and she knew it. There was a version of the next 5 minutes in which she said, I need time to think, and pulled back and let this cool down and gave Preston's narrative time to settle, and decided that protecting herself meant staying in the safe lanes. She could see that version clearly. She could also see that she had been living inside a version of that choice for 3 years. Send me the address, she said. He did. She got in a cab and gave the driver the street, and as the city moved past her in the gathering dark of a November afternoon, she felt the last of the caution she'd been rationing dissolve into something entirely different. Not recklessness, not impulse. Something with more gravity than either of those. The cab pulled up to a building she recognized as one of the addresses in the part of the city where Damien Moretti's actual life happened. Not the charity galas, not the cafe by the river. This. She got out. She went inside. And upstairs in a room overlooking the city, where 2 men who had been closest friends for 22 years were now moving toward each other with the particular momentum of a collision that had been building for 3 years. Charlotte Hayes walked through a door that she already knew could not be unfound. The door closed behind her and the sound of it was very final. The apartment was different from the West Loop safe house. Larger, lived in the specific way of a place that belonged to someone rather than merely housed them. Bookshelves with actual books, some of them spine-cracked and clearly read. A kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee and something darker underneath it, wood and leather, and the accumulated atmosphere of a man who spent serious time in a space. The city through the floor-to-ceiling windows was fully dark now, Chicago laying itself out in cold light 14 floors below. Damien was standing at the windows when she came in. He turned when he heard her, and she saw immediately that something had changed in the hour since she'd called him. The controlled stillness was still there, but the temperature underneath it was different, colder. Something had happened between her phone call and this moment. What is it? She said. Not what happened. Not are you okay? She had learned his register quickly enough to know that the direct question was the only one he'd answer honestly. He looked at her for a moment. Then, sit down. Tell me first. Charlotte? Tell me standing up. I'm not going to fall over. She set her bag on the table near the door. Her coat was still on. What happened? He turned fully from the window. His hands were at his sides, which was unusual. She had noticed that Damien always had something to do with his hands, a glass, a phone, his jacket lapel. Hands at his sides meant he had already decided what he was about to say and had set down everything else to say it. Preston didn't just build a narrative, Damien said. He filed a report. The room went very quiet. What kind of report? She said carefully. A financial crimes complaint. With the city. Naming me. He watched her face. And naming you as a knowing associate. The cold started somewhere at the base of her spine and moved upward with deliberate efficiency. That's insane. I have nothing to do with... I know that. His voice was steady, but the thing underneath it was not. The complaint is manufactured. It will go nowhere. My lawyers are already on it. A pause. But the process takes time, and during that time the complaint is a matter of record, public record. Charlotte understood before he finished the sentence. He's going to leak it. He already has. One journalist. Someone who owes him coverage. Damien's jaw was tight. By tomorrow morning, it will be framed as an ongoing investigation. Your name attached. She stood very still in the middle of the room. Her coat was suddenly too hot, but she didn't move to take it off. Her brain was running the math fast and brutal. Her job, her professional reputation, 3 years of building a career in a city where reputation was architecture, her name attached in print to a federal adjacent financial complaint involving a known organized crime figure. He's trying to destroy me, she said. The words came out without heat, just the flat recognition of it. Yes. Not just hurt me, destroy me, my job, my career, everything. She heard her own voice from a slight distance, the way you heard things when your nervous system was deciding between several extremely bad options. He's doing this because I sat in a cafe with you. He's doing this because he realized this morning that I'm not going to stand down. Damien moved away from the window, closer but not close. Keeping a distance, she was starting to understand he maintained deliberately when things were volatile, giving her air, giving her room to feel whatever she needed to feel without his physical presence managing it. He knows I won't be moved by social pressure. He knows I won't be moved by the friendship history. So he went for the one thing he calculated I would move for. Schwartz. Me, she said. You. The words sat between them. Charlotte turned away from him and walked to the window. The city was enormous and completely indifferent out there. She pressed 2 fingers to the cold glass and felt the temperature travel up through her hand. 3 years. She had given 3 years to a man who was now, without hesitation, without apparent moral cost, attempting to set her entire life on fire because she had chosen to exist outside of his narrative. The specific viciousness of it, the surgical targeting of her livelihood rather than her person, told her something she hadn't fully absorbed until this moment. Preston Calloway had never once been afraid of her. He had been afraid of losing the story he told about himself. And she had been a prop in that story. And props did not get to walk off stage and take up with someone else's production. She turned back around. What do I do? She said. That depends on what you want. I want my name clean and my job intact. Then we respond. He said it simply. Not defensively, not with lawyers issuing statements that read like guilt. We respond with the truth, directly, before his version calculates into a settled narrative. He moved to the low table near the couch and picked up his phone. Madison has something. Charlotte stared at him. What? The night you left his building. Madison was on the phone with you when you were still outside the door. She recorded the call automatically. Her phone does it for all incoming calls. She told me she forgot she had the setting on until she checked 2 days ago. He held up the phone, turned the screen toward her. 22 minutes of audio, including the part where you were still standing in the hallway outside his apartment, including Preston's voice, clearly audible, through the door. Charlotte felt something move through her chest that was not quite relief and not quite devastation, but somewhere on the fault line between them. She told you about this before she told me. She called me at 9 this morning and asked me what to do with it. She wanted my assessment of whether it was safe to use before she brought it to you. He set the phone down. Which, for what it's worth, I think speaks very highly of her judgment and very poorly of the situation she was navigating. Charlotte closed her eyes, opened them. Can I hear it? He crossed the room and handed her the phone. She pressed play. Her own voice first, thin and slightly distorted by the recording, saying Madison's name outside a penthouse door. Then the sound of the hallway, ventilation, distant elevator mechanics. And then, muffled but entirely audible, laughter from inside the apartment. Preston's laugh, which she had heard 1,000 times and which now sounded like something from a documentary about a person she had never actually known. Then his voice, relaxed and slightly drunk, and completely unguarded. I'd rather die. And then the rest of it, all of it. The word temporary, the category explanation, the particular cruelty of a man describing another human being as a feature of a building phase rather than a person deserving a future. She listened to all of it standing in Damien's apartment with the city dark behind her and her coat still on and her hand completely steady on the phone. When it ended, she handed the phone back. Okay, she said. Okay. Let's use it. What happened next took 3 days and felt like 3 years compressed. Madison sent the audio to her own phone, and they sat together at Madison's kitchen table. Charlotte, Madison, and a woman named Priya Anand, who was Damien's attorney and who had the specific economy of movement of someone who had been in difficult rooms and won, and they mapped it out. Not a leak, not a social media cascade, something more precise than that. Priya contacted the journalist Preston had used directly, not with a threat, with the audio file and a simple statement: before you run your piece, you should hear what the complaint is actually designed to suppress. The journalist, to his credit, listened. The financial crimes piece never ran. What ran instead, 48 hours later, was a carefully structured account. No names in the piece itself, the parties anonymous, of a man who had described his long-term partner as a temporary convenience to his friends, recorded unknowingly, and who had subsequently filed a fabricated regulatory complaint against an associate of his former partner in an apparent act of retaliation. The anonymity lasted approximately 6 hours before Chicago's social infrastructure did what it always did with barely coded stories about recognizable people. By Thursday evening, Preston Calloway's name was attached to the story in every group chat and dinner table conversation in the circles he had spent years cultivating. His investors were calling, his family was calling. His carefully constructed image, the self-made young executive, the charitable donor, the man about town, was coming apart along every seam simultaneously. Charlotte was at Madison's apartment when Damien called her at 8:15 that evening. "It's moving fast," he said. "I know. I've been watching." She was on the couch with her laptop, Madison beside her, both of them in the strange adrenaline exhaustion of people who had just done something irreversible and were waiting for the ground to stop moving. "Are you okay? Ask me in a week." A pause. "He's going to want a confrontation," Damien said. "He's not the type to absorb this quietly. He'll want to be in the same room with you." "I know. I'd prefer you not be in that room without—" "I know," she said again, differently. She stared at the laptop screen, at the cascading commentary on a story that was about her life, framed in third person, spreading through a city at the speed of recognition. "But if it happens, I want to face it, not be managed around it." Silence on his end. "Okay," he said finally. "Then I'm with you when it happens." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." The quiet emphasis was everything. "I want to be." She exhaled. Madison, beside her, was pretending very hard to be absorbed in her phone. "I'll call you tomorrow," Charlotte said. "I'll be here." She set her phone down. Madison lasted approximately 4 seconds. "He said he wants to be there," Madison said, not looking up from her phone. "You heard that from across the room. Your speaker volume is aspirational." Madison set her own phone down and looked at Charlotte with the particular expression she reserved for moments of maximum importance, stripped of all the usual deflection and humor. "How are you?" Actually, Charlotte thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way she had been avoiding doing for the better part of a week. "I feel like I've been taken apart and put back together slightly differently," she said, "like the same components in a different configuration." "Is that bad?" "I don't think so." She looked at the laptop screen, at her own life in third person, anonymous and entirely recognizable. "I think the old configuration wasn't actually working. The confrontation happened on a Saturday. She didn't plan it. That was the thing she would turn over later. She hadn't planned it, hadn't staged it, hadn't given herself the preparation she had promised herself she would take. She was at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park, a Saturday morning errand, nothing significant. She was standing at the counter waiting for her order when she heard his voice behind her. "Charlotte." Preston Calloway looked like a man who had not slept cleanly in a week. He was wearing clothes that fit him well because his clothes always fit him well, but there was something underneath the surface that the clothes couldn't resolve. A fraying, a diminishment, the specific look of a person whose performance has been running without an audience and who has just realized it. His jaw was tight. His eyes moved over her face with something that started as anger and flickered, just briefly, into something more complicated before hardening back. She turned around fully. She picked up her coffee when the barista set it on the counter because having something in her hands felt important, and she looked at Preston Calloway for the first time in 5 weeks. "Preston," she said. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and stopped close, not touching, not threatening, but using proximity the way he always had, as a form of pressure. She didn't step back. She noticed that about herself. She didn't step back. "You need to hear me out," he said. "I don't, actually." "Charlotte," his voice dropped. Around them, the coffee shop moved in its ordinary Saturday rhythm. Orders called, espresso machines running, a family with a stroller navigating toward the door. Nobody was watching them. Or everyone was, peripherally, in the way urban people watched conflict in public without acknowledging it. "What you did, what you and Damien did to my reputation, what we did," she said, "was play your own audio back. That was a private conversation that you had loudly in your apartment while I was standing outside your door." She kept her voice even and low. The evenness surprised her. She had anticipated more turbulence in herself for this moment. "You told your friends you'd rather die than marry me. You told them I was temporary. You said it laughing, Preston, not in a fight, not in a dark moment, laughing." His jaw worked. "You don't understand the context. There is no context." She said it without heat, without cruelty, the way someone states the conclusion of a long calculation. "You meant it. That's the whole context. So you ran to him." The anger came back into his face, and behind it something raw. Genuine wounded pride, genuine disbelief, the specific injury of a man who had never once considered that Charlotte Hayes was capable of any kind of independent gravitational force. "You ran straight to Damien, and I didn't run anywhere. I walked away from your building, and I built something real in the space you left." She looked at him, this man she had loved for 3 years, and tried to find the grief she expected to feel, and found mostly clarity. "You filed a false complaint against me. You tried to attach my name to a federal process to intimidate me. You sent your cousin to threaten me with social destruction." She watched each item land on his face. "And you did all of it not because you loved me, because you couldn't stand that the story ended without your permission." Preston stared at her, his mouth opened and closed. "You didn't lose me," Charlotte said. The words arrived fully formed from somewhere that had been building them for 5 weeks. "You threw me away. I just had the clarity to stay thrown." The coffee shop moved around them. Preston's face went through several things in rapid succession. The anger, the wounded pride, and then something she had not expected, a flash of genuine pain. Not performed, real. For just a second, under everything he had built around himself, she saw the actual cost of who he had chosen to be. It didn't change anything, but she saw it. "I would have married you," he said. His voice was different, quieter. She didn't entirely believe him, and she didn't entirely not believe him, and she understood that both things could be true, that he had been careless with her and would still have eventually, under different conditions, done the thing he said he'd rather die than do, that human beings were not consistent in their worst moments, that this did not make the worst moments less real. "That's not the point anymore," she said. She picked up her coffee, and she left. She was half a block down the street, the cold hitting her face, when her phone rang. Not Damien, not Madison, a number she didn't recognize, different from the threatening unknown numbers of 2 weeks ago. A Chicago area code. She almost didn't answer. Some calculus she couldn't name made her pick up. "Ms. Hayes," a woman's voice, brisk, professional. "My name is Layla Okafor. I'm a journalist with the Tribune. I've been working on a piece about regulatory complaints used as retaliation instruments in the context of personal disputes. I believe you may be relevant to my research." Charlotte stopped walking. "I'm not interested in talking to journalists," she said. "I understand. But Ms. Hayes, before you decline, I want you to know that I've already spoken to 3 of your former colleagues from Preston Calloway's social circle, people who have provided corroborating information about a pattern of behavior." A pause. "And I have something I think you need to hear. Something that predates your relationship with Damien Moretti by about 18 months. Charlotte's hand tightened on the phone. "Something about Preston?" she said. "Something about what Damien Moretti has been doing on your behalf," the journalist said carefully. "Without your knowledge, for considerably longer than you." The journalist's voice was still in her ear. Charlotte stood on the Lincoln Park sidewalk with her coffee going cold in her hand and the Saturday morning city moving around her like she was a stone in a current, and she said, "Tell me what you know." Layla Okafor told her. It took 11 minutes. Charlotte stood in the same spot for all 11 of them, not moving, barely breathing, the cold working through her coat unnoticed because every unit of her attention was occupied by what she was hearing. When the journalist finished, Charlotte asked 2 questions, received 2 answers, and said she would call back. She hung up. She stood there another 30 seconds. Then she called Damien. It rang 4 times. 4 times, which had never happened before. He always picked up by the second, and went to voicemail. She hung up without leaving a message. Called again. 4 rings, voicemail. She called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. Ms. Hayes? Where is he? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. He's in a meeting. He asked not to be... Marcus. Her voice came out in a register she didn't entirely recognize, flat and very precise. I need to speak to him. Right now. Not in an hour. Right now. Another pause. I'll have him call you back in 10 minutes. 5. She walked back to her car. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine. She set her coffee in the cup holder and stared through the windshield at the street and ran through everything Layla Okafor had told her with the methodical, slightly nauseating efficiency of someone reconstructing a sequence they should have already known. 18 months ago, Preston had done something. She had known, from Damien's careful non-answer at the West Loop apartment, that something had happened 18 months ago. She had filed it and left it unfiled because there were things she had decided not to push for before she was ready for the answers. The journalist had filled in the shape of it. 18 months ago, Preston had been seeing someone else. Not casually. A sustained, parallel relationship with a woman named Elena Voss, the daughter of one of Preston's business partners. He had been managing both relationships simultaneously with the practiced efficiency of a man who had never been required to account for his time to anyone. Charlotte had not known. Of course she had not known. What Charlotte had not known, and what the journalist had spent 2 weeks verifying across 4 independent sources, was what happened when Damien found out. Damien had found out approximately 16 months ago, and he had not told her. What he had done instead was go to Preston directly and deliver what every source described, with varying degrees of diplomatic language, as an ultimatum. And the parallel relationship where Damien would tell Charlotte himself. Preston had ended it, or appeared to end it, or ended the version of it that was visible, and Damien had made a decision to give Preston the opportunity to come clean himself. Preston had not come clean. The weeks had become months. The months had accumulated. And Damien Moretti, this man who had been telling Charlotte for the past several weeks that he had been watching her settle for less than she deserved, that he had seen things he didn't have the right to say, that he was not certain he had made the right call, had been sitting on information that could have freed her 16 months ago. Her phone rang. Damien's name on the screen. She picked up. I just talked to a journalist from the Tribune, she said. No greeting, no preamble. The words came out the way a diagnosis came out. No cruelty in them, but no protection either. Layla Okafor. She's been working a piece on Preston for 3 weeks. She told me about Elena Voss. Silence on his end. Damien. Her voice cracked on the second syllable, just slightly, the first structural failure in the composure she had been maintaining since the sidewalk. Say something. Where are you? He said. In my car, Lincoln Park. Come here, please. Answer me first. She put her hand flat on the dashboard, kneading the solidity of it. You knew 16 months ago that he was with someone else while he was with me. You confronted him. He appeared to stop, and you decided not to tell me. Yes. 1 word. No elaboration, no immediate defense. Just the flat acknowledgement, and in any other context, the honesty of it would have been something, but right now the honesty was the thing she was having trouble with, because it meant the answer had always been this simple. Why? She said. Because I had no right to walk into your relationship, and you had every right. The heat arrived finally, moving up through her chest into her throat. Not screaming, something more controlled than screaming, and in some ways more frightening. You had every human right to tell me that the man I was building my life around was running a second life simultaneously. You had every right, and you made a different choice. I made a choice that you what? That you thought was protecting me? She heard her own voice. She sounded like someone she was only now meeting. Or that protected something else. Because I need to understand, Damien. I need to understand whether you kept that information because you thought it was the right thing to do for me, or because you wanted to be the one who, because waiting felt like She stopped, started again. Did you think if you waited long enough I would eventually leave him on my own terms, and you could be there when I did? The silence on his end was the longest one yet, and it was the silence, not any answer he could have given, that told her everything. Come here, he said again. His voice was different now. The containment still there, but something underneath it that she had not heard from him before. Something that sounded like a man paying a cost he had known was eventually coming. Please? I'm not asking you to forgive anything. I'm asking you to come here so we can say whatever needs to be said in the same room. She started the car. He met her at the door of the building on the 14th floor, which meant he had been watching for her car from the window, which meant something she was not ready to name yet. He stepped back to let her in, and she walked past him into the apartment without looking at him, because looking at him right now required more regulation than she currently had available. She went to the window. The city again, always the city, the one constant in all of these rooms. She stood with her back to him and said, "Tell me the whole thing, from the beginning, not the version that makes you look best, the actual version." She heard him move behind her, not toward her, just the sound of him settling into stillness in the room. I found out about Elena Voss from someone in Preston's finance operation. Not because I was looking, because the man wanted to do me a favor and thought this was currency. A pause. I went to Preston that same night. What did you say to him? I told him he had 2 weeks to end it and tell you himself, or I would. And he ended it. He ended it with Elena, yes. Told me he'd handled it. The words were careful, not evasive. She could hear him weighing each one. I gave him a month, then another month. He never told you. And you gave him more time. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to tell you myself, that forcing it would damage you more than... He stopped. She heard the quality of the stop, the way a man stopped when he reached the edge of a justification he no longer believes. That was not the whole reason. What was the whole reason? The longest silence yet. Because I had been watching you love him for 3 years, Damien said. And the only honest version of telling you about Elena was also the version where I told you why I cared enough to confront him about it in the first place. And I didn't. Something in his voice shifted, the contained register giving way to something rawer beneath it. I didn't have any right to make that confession while you were still in the relationship. I didn't have the right to put that on you. Charlotte turned around. He was standing in the center of the room, jacket off, for the first time in any room she had been in with him, standing in just the dark shirt, hands at his sides again, that tell she had learned. Looking at her with the specific expression of a man who has stopped managing what his face does because the situation has passed the point where managing it is useful. You were protecting yourself, she said. Not an accusation, a clarification. Yes. He said it the way he said all the hard things, directly, without packaging. Along with everything else I told you, both things were true simultaneously. She looked at him. This man, this complicated, dangerous, honest, in almost all directions man who had waited and watched and made choices she would have made differently and was now standing in the center of his own apartment, taking the accounting without flinching. I'm so angry at you, she said. I know. Not because you didn't tell me about Elena. That's... She pressed her fingers to her forehead, sorting the anger into its actual components, refusing to let it stay unexamined. I would have wanted to know. I deserved to know. But I understand, barely, the position you were in. She dropped her hand. I'm angry because for the past month you've been letting me rebuild my picture of the past 3 years, and you knew there was a piece I was missing. You let me walk through all of it without the whole map. Yes. That's a form of control, Damien. Different from Preston's, but yes. He said it harder this time, with his eyes on hers and something in them that was not defensiveness, but acknowledgement of a cost he was paying right now, in real time. I know what it is. I know what I did. I'm not arguing with you. Then say something that is an agreement. Say something that's actually you. He looked at her for a moment. Then he crossed the room. Not fast, not slow, with the deliberate intention of every movement he made, and stopped close enough that she could see the exact quality of what was in his face. Not guilt exactly. Something with more gravity than guilt. The expression of a man who had been carrying a long weight and had finally set it down in front of someone who had the right to see what it looked like. "I have loved you," he said, "since the night Preston introduced us 3 years ago. That is not a convenient retrospective. That is a fact I have been managing every day since. And every decision I made, including the ones you're right to be angry about, was made inside that fact, which does not excuse the decisions but does explain why none of them were simple." The room was very still. Charlotte's heart was doing something complicated. She was angry, genuinely and legitimately angry, and she was also standing close to a man who had just said one of the most unguarded things she had ever heard another human being say, and both of those things were occupying the same space at the same time with no resolution available. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter where she'd set it coming in. She ignored it. It buzzed again, and again. Then Madison's name lit the screen from across the room. Not a call, a rapid sequence of texts arriving with the frequency that meant something had changed. She crossed to the phone. "Turn on your phone notifications. The Tribune piece just dropped. Early. It's live." Then, "Charlotte. Preston is in the comments. He is losing it publicly." Then, "He's called you out by name. He tagged your work account. Charlotte, this is bad. You need to see this right now." She opened the browser. The Tribune piece was there. Layla Okafor's byline, a headline about retaliatory regulatory complaints. The anonymous architecture of it that anyone in their shared social circles would decode in minutes. And beneath it, in the public comments, Preston Calloway had done the thing that people did when they ran out of private options. He had gone public with everything. Her name. Damien's name. The affair allegation, stated now as fact rather than implication. The financial complaint framed as legitimate concern. 3 years of their relationship narrated in the specific way of a man constructing a trial record. Every kindness he had shown her cataloged, every sacrifice annotated, the whole thing assembled into a document that said, "Look what I gave her and look what she did." And then, at the end, 4 words that stopped her cold. "Ask her about Voss." She stared at the screen. Elena Voss's name, in public, in Preston's voice, weaponized. Not as a confession, not as accountability, but as a redirect. A way of taking the story that was about his behavior and making it about something else, something murkier, something that implicated Damien, and therefore, by proximity, implicated her. He knew she knew. Catherine had told him, or he had guessed, or the journalist had contacted him for comment, and the question about Elena had tipped him off. And his response to being caught in his own buried history was to dig it up himself, on his own terms, and use it as a weapon before anyone else could. "Damien." She held the phone out to him. He read it. His face did not change. But she watched his hands which were usually so still, close into a slow, deliberate tension at his sides. "He's trying to pull Elena into this," she said. "Why? What does that do for him?" "It reframes the story." His voice was very quiet. "Right now the story is about him, about what he said on that recording, about the complaint. If he can make it about Damien Moretti's history with a business associate's daughter..." He paused. "It gives people a different version to pick. Some of them will pick the murkier one, because the murkier one doesn't require them to believe Preston Calloway is simply a bad man." "Can Elena be hurt by this? She's been in Amsterdam for 8 months. She left after Preston ended things." His jaw was tight. "She didn't know I confronted him. She doesn't know any of this." Charlotte set the phone down. She put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. Her hands were not shaking. She noted that with something that was almost clinical distance. Her hands were not shaking. Her breathing was controlled. She was operating, and the operating felt like the most honest version of herself she had been in years. "I need to call Layla Okafor back," she said. "Charlotte, I need to give her the full story. On record. My name, not anonymous." She looked up. "The recording, the complaint. Elena, all of it. The complete sequence. Because if Preston is willing to go public with half the truth to protect himself, then the only counter to that is the whole truth." She picked up her phone. "And I need it from you first. Everything. The night you confronted him. What he said. What you said. Everything you know." Damien looked at her for a long moment. The city was loud somewhere beyond the windows. Saturday traffic. A city that did not know or care what was happening in this apartment on the 14th floor. "If I go on record," he said carefully, "it opens things. Not the complaint. The complaint is nothing. But being named publicly in a Tribune piece associated with Preston Calloway's business practices, I know what it costs you. Do you? Yes. She held his gaze. Do you trust me? The question landed in the room and stayed there. Damian Moretti, who had spent 22 years running an organization on the foundational principle that trust was a liability you managed, rather than a resource you extended, looked at Charlotte Hayes standing in his kitchen with her phone in her hand and her jaw set and her eyes completely steady, and said, yes, one word, the same economy as always. But she felt the weight of what it cost him more clearly than she had felt anything in weeks. Then tell me everything, she said. Start from the night you found out. He told her. All of it this time, in order, without the omissions and careful framings of the previous weeks. She listened without interrupting, standing at the counter with her phone recording him. He had said she could, when she asked, which was its own form of the thing they were building. And when he finished, she asked 3 follow-up questions and got 3 complete answers. Then she called Layla Okafor. The journalist picked up on the first ring. Ms. Hayes, I want to go on record, Charlotte said. Full name, everything. I have a primary source who will corroborate, and I have the original audio. She paused. But I need you to understand something first. Preston put Elena Voss's name in a public comment 20 minutes ago. She's in Amsterdam. She doesn't know what's happening. Before any of this publishes, someone needs to reach her and give her the choice of whether she wants to be part of this story or not. A silence on the journalist's end. That's not standard practice for... I'm not asking you to protect him. I'm asking you to give her a phone call before her name goes national. Charlotte's voice was even and absolutely certain. If you can commit to that, I'll give you everything. If you can't, I'll find another way. Another silence. Shorter this time. Give me 2 hours, Layla Okafor said. You have 1. She hung up. Damian was watching her from the other side of the kitchen. His arms were folded, not closed off but contained, the way he always contained himself. But his eyes were doing that thing she had learned to read, the thing that happened when she surprised him, which she had come to understand was not easy to do. 1 hour, he said. He already has half the day's head start on the narrative. 1 hour is generous. She set the phone on the counter. Her legs were tired. She had been standing since the coffee shop, since the sidewalk, since the car. 3 hours of pure adrenaline held vertical by necessity. She moved to the kitchen stool and sat down and let herself feel the exhaustion of it for just a moment. After this publishes, what happens to you, concretely? He moved to the counter opposite her, poured 2 glasses of water, slid one toward her, drank from his own. Some business relationships become complicated. Some people who have been comfortable with ambiguity will find clarity in a direction I don't prefer. He set his glass down. Nothing I can't manage. And Preston? Preston loses the social architecture he spent 15 years building. Business partners who value reputation over loyalty, which is most of them, will distance themselves. He paused. His family will protect him privately. They won't defend him publicly. Is that enough? Losing his reputation? Damian looked at her carefully. What are you asking? I'm asking if there are things that happen in your world that I need to know about before they happen. She held his gaze. I'm not asking you to be something you aren't. I'm asking you not to manage me around it. The kitchen was quiet. Water ran somewhere in the building's pipes, a distant domestic sound that made the room feel briefly, strangely ordinary. He filed a false complaint against you, Damian said. That's a legal matter. Priya is handling it through appropriate channels, and it will result in consequences for him that are proportionate and entirely above board. He paused. Beyond that, I am asking you to trust that I understand where the lines are. And if I don't, then you tell me, and I listen. He said it without drama. That's the difference between me and him, Charlotte. Not that I don't have edges, that I listen to you. She looked at him. This man she had known peripherally for 3 years and directly for 5 weeks, and who had managed, in that compressed timeline, to be the most honest person in her life, while also withholding something significant. Both those things were true. She was learning that people were not one thing cleanly. Okay, she said. Okay. Her phone lit. Not Layla Okafor. Madison. Charlotte. Preston just called Madison's office. He called her office and told her managing partner that she's been assisting with what he called a coordinated harassment campaign. Madison's boss pulled her into a meeting 20 minutes ago. Charlotte's hand tightened on the phone. He's going after her job, Madison's next text read. He's going after my job because I gave you the recording. The exhaustion evaporated. Something replaced it that was not anger, something colder and more functional than anger. The specific clarity of a person who has just understood that the person they are fighting does not have a bottom. She held the phone out to Damien. He read it. His face went very still. The kind of still that she understood now was not calm, but its opposite. The stillness of a man pulling something back before it expressed. Marcus, he said, not to her but to the room, pulling out his own phone. Get the car. Where are we going? Charlotte said. We're going to Madison's office, he said. And then Preston Calloway is going to understand, in a room he cannot leave before I'm finished, exactly what he has started. He was already moving toward the door. She was already moving toward the door when Madison's next message arrived. Don't come here. I mean it. I'm handling it. Charlotte stopped. Read it twice. Showed it to Damien, who had paused with his jacket half on, watching her face. He thought this would break me, Madison's next text read. He doesn't know me at all. Give me 45 minutes. Then 4 seconds later, and tell Damien to stand down. I don't need a cavalry. I need him to stay out of my managing partner's building so this doesn't become something bigger than it is. Charlotte looked up at Damien. He read the messages over her shoulder, his jaw working once, and then the tension in his shoulders released. Not completely, not the way tension released when a problem dissolved, but the way it released when a man trusted someone else's read on a situation against his own instinct. That cost him something. She could see it. She's right, Charlotte said. I know she's right. He pulled his jacket the rest of the way on anyway, the motion completed out of some muscular reflex. I don't like it. You don't have to like it. She set her phone on the counter and looked at him. Madison has been managing difficult men in professional settings since she was 23 years old. She can handle a managing partner's meeting. She paused. What she can't handle is Damien Moretti showing up in the lobby, which turns a conversation about an internal policy dispute into a front-page incident. He looked at her for a moment. Then he took his jacket back off and laid it over the back of the kitchen stool with the deliberate movements of a man physically standing down from something. 45 minutes, he said. 45 minutes. They waited. It was the strangest 45 minutes Charlotte had experienced in a month full of strange time. She and Damien sat at the kitchen table with water and the city outside doing its Saturday afternoon business, and the silence between them had a different quality now than any previous silence, heavier, more inhabited. Everything had been said that needed to be said, and none of it had been resolved, because resolution was not a thing you arrived at in a single conversation. It was something you moved toward over time with repeated decisions, and they both knew it, and the knowing of it was its own particular weight. At minute 32, Damien said, I should have told you about Elena. When I found out. Yes. I've been sitting with the justifications for 16 months, and they're not nothing, but they're not enough either. He was looking at his water glass. You deserve the information. What you did with it would have been yours to decide. Charlotte looked at the table. Do you know what I think I would have done? If you told me then? What? I think I would have confronted Preston. He would have denied it convincingly, and I would have chosen to believe him. She looked up. Because I wasn't ready to not believe him, not 16 months ago. She held Damien's gaze steadily. I don't know that the timing was wrong, is what I'm saying. I know the withholding was wrong. Those are different things. He studied her face. You're being more generous than I've earned. I'm being accurate, and there's a difference. She set her hands flat on the table. What I need from you, going forward, whatever this is going forward, is that there is no more managing what I know, no more deciding what I'm ready for on my behalf. Are we clear on that? We're clear. If something happens in your world that touches my life in any way, you hear it from me first. He said it without hesitation, without the slight lag that would have indicated negotiation. Non-negotiable. She nodded once. The table between them felt like a different kind of table than it had an hour ago. Her phone buzzed. Madison. Still here. Managing partner is reasonable. Preston called him directly, which was actually a tactical error because now it looks like harassment from the outside rather than a legitimate complaint. Give me 10 more minutes. Then, also he called me emotionally compromised, which, I want to be clear, has activated something in me, and I am now thriving in this meeting. Charlotte exhaled for the first time in 40 minutes. Something unwound in her chest. Not everything, not the complicated residue of everything the day had already cost, but the specific cord of fear she had been holding taut since Madison's first text. She showed the messages to Damien. She watched the corner of his mouth move. "She's extraordinary," he said. "She really is, sir." Madison walked out of her office building at 4:17 in the afternoon, coat buttoned against the November cold, and called Charlotte immediately. Charlotte picked up before the first ring finished. "Talk to me. I'm fine. My job is fine." Madison's voice was the voice of someone who had been through something and was running on the adrenaline of having come out the other side. Preston called my managing partner directly and told him I had participated in a coordinated campaign against a third party using confidential client information. A pause. Which is completely fabricated because you are not a client of the firm, and the recording was my own personal phone. My managing partner, to his credit, asked Preston for documentation and got nothing. Because there is no documentation. Because Preston was running on rage and bad judgment and apparently no counsel. So it's handled. It's handled. There will probably be a follow-up conversation next week, but the acute crisis is over. Charlotte heard wind through the phone, Madison walking. "How are you?" "Actually, how are you?" "I talked to Damien." A brief pause. "And?" "He told me everything, all of it." Charlotte moved to the window, the city beyond it starting to go orange at the edges as the afternoon shifted. "The Elena Voss situation. Why he didn't tell me?" "Charlotte, I'm not broken by it. I want to be clear about that before you say whatever you're about to say." She pressed her free hand to the glass. "I'm angry about the withholding, and I understand it. Both things. I'm holding both things." Madison was quiet for a moment. "Is it something you can come back from? With him?" Charlotte looked at her own hand on the cold glass. The city out there, enormous and indifferent and full of people navigating their own impossible weights. "I think so," she said. "I think it's something we can come back from together. Which is different from me coming back from it alone." "That's the most emotionally evolved thing you've said in 3 years," Madison said. "I'm writing it down." "Don't write it down. It's already written." But Layla Okafor called at 5:45. She had reached Elena Voss in Amsterdam. Elena had been given 40 minutes to read the existing piece, understand what was in the public domain, and decide what she wanted. Her decision was to provide a brief, voluntary statement confirming the timeline of her relationship with Preston and its end, and asking not to be contacted further. Layla had honored that. "I have everything I need," the journalist said. "The full piece with your on-record statement and the corroborating source information runs tomorrow morning. Sunday edition, front of the Metro section, digital at 6 a.m. What about Preston's public comments from this afternoon? Incorporated into the piece as evidence of the escalation pattern. His decision to name you publicly in a comment section actually strengthens the narrative we're documenting. A pause that had something professional and slightly wry in it. He may not have thought that through. "He was angry," Charlotte said. "Angry people don't think. Angry people with resources and bad judgment are my entire career," Layla said. "Ms. Hayes, for what it's worth, I've been doing this for 12 years. The combination of a clear audio recording, a documentable retaliatory filing, and a subject who went public in his own name is about as clean as these things get." "Nothing about this feels clean." "No," the journalist said, and her voice dropped its professional register for just a moment. "I imagine it doesn't." Charlotte stayed at Damien's apartment that night, not because she had nowhere else to go. Madison's couch was always there, had always been there, but because she made the decision consciously, standing in his kitchen at 7 in the evening with the city going dark outside, and said, "I'm not going back to Madison's tonight." Damien looked at her across the kitchen. "Okay. I'm not saying that to make a statement. I'm saying it because I'm tired and this is where I want to be." She met his eyes. "Is that clear enough?" It's clear. She ordered food. She was the one who ordered it, because she needed the small agency of that, of deciding what they ate on a night that had already taken so much decision-making out of her hands. Thai food, from a place she found in his neighborhood that had 4-star reviews and an honest photograph of their pad see ew. He watched her do it without interfering, without suggesting alternatives. She appreciated that more than she could have articulated. They ate at the kitchen table. The food arrived in containers that they didn't bother transferring to plates. Damien ate the way he did most things, focused, without ceremony. She ate the way she had been eating for a month, mechanically at first, then, gradually, with actual appetite returning somewhere around the second container. He told her between bites about the building he was in the process of acquiring in the South Loop, a legitimate real estate development, a mixed-use project, something he said he had been working toward for 2 years as a way of shifting the weight of his business interests in a direction that kept him in Chicago long-term. She asked questions, real ones, not polite ones, not. He answered with the specific detail of a man explaining something he cared about to someone he wanted to actually understand it. She told him about a project she had been quietly developing at work, a client account she had been building carefully for 8 months, that if it landed would represent the largest independent initiative of her career. She had not told Preston about it. The realization arrived in the middle of her own sentence, and she paused on it for a second, and Damien caught the pause. "You didn't tell him about it," he said. "No." "Why not?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I knew he would reframe it, make it about whether it was realistic, whether the timing was right, whether I was overextending." She looked at her food container. "And I knew if he did that I would start to doubt it, because that's what I did. I absorbed his doubts because I thought that's what partnership meant. It isn't." "No." She looked up. "I know that now." They were quiet for a moment. The comfortable quiet of two people who have been through enough together in a compressed time that silence no longer requires filling. "Tell me about the project," Damien said. She told him. All of it, the whole architecture of it, the client, the strategy, the specific opportunity she had identified that nobody else on her team had moved on yet. He listened the way he always listened, with his full and unperformative attention. And when she finished, he asked one question that went straight to the structural risk she had been privately managing for 3 weeks and hadn't said out loud to anyone. She stared at him. "How did you know to ask that?" "Because it's the question the client will ask first." "How do you know what question a client in my industry asks first?" "Because I've been on the other side of those pitches," he said simply. "Not your specific industry, but capital and risk assessment have a consistent grammar across sectors." She looked at him. This man, this genuinely complicated man who had loved her from a distance for 3 years and made choices she would have made differently, and was sitting across a kitchen table on a Saturday night asking the right question about her work because he had actually been listening. "You're a strange person," she said. "Yes," he agreed, without apparent concern. The Tribune piece ran at 6 a.m. Sunday. Charlotte was awake before it published. She had slept. Actually slept in the way she hadn't slept in weeks. The deep, heavy sleep of a body finally releasing accumulated tension, and woke at 5:45 in the gray pre-dawn and lay still for a few minutes before getting up. She read the piece at the kitchen table with coffee, alone. Damien was still asleep, which she was glad of because she wanted to read it without anyone watching her face. Layla Okafor had written it with the particular precision of someone who understood that the facts were sufficient and did not require editorial amplification. The audio recording was referenced and described in enough detail that its content was clear without being fully reproduced. The regulatory complaint was documented, its fabricated nature established through Priya's legal commentary. The Elena Voss timeline was there, brief and factual. Elena's voluntary statement included in full. Charlotte's own quote ran near the end of the piece. She had given it the previous afternoon, standing in Damien's kitchen, and she had chosen the words the way she had been choosing words for a month now, without the old instinct to soften, to qualify, to leave herself room to retreat. "I spent 3 years in a relationship with a man I believed I understood. I did not understand him. When I left, I made choices about my own life that are mine to account for. The attempt to destroy my professional reputation and that of the people around me in response to those choices is not the action of a person with a legitimate grievance. It's the action of a person who has never been told no. She read it back, and it still said exactly what she meant. Her phone began filling up almost immediately. Colleagues, acquaintances, two people she had not heard from in over a year. She read none of the messages for the first hour. She sat with her coffee and the gray Sunday light and let the peace exist in the world without her managing the reaction to it. Damien came out of the bedroom at 7:15, already dressed, which she had come to understand was just how he woke. Not a performance, just a man who didn't do half states. He poured coffee, looked at her face, looked at her phone face up on the table with the notifications accumulating. "How is it?" he said. "It's what it is." She turned the phone over, face down. "It says the true things accurately. That's all I needed it to do." He sat across from her, drank his coffee. Preston's PR firm released a statement at 6:15. She looked up. "You're already monitoring it." "I'm always monitoring things. That's not new information." He set his mug down. "The statement is boilerplate. Denials without specifics, expressions of disappointment, the language of a prepared response that was written before the piece published because someone competent told him to have it ready." He paused. "It reads like a man who has already accepted the damage and is now trying to control the rate of decay." Is that better or worse than fighting? It means the acute phase is over. He looked at her steadily. He'll retreat now. Regroup. The people who are going to distance themselves will distance themselves, and the people who stay will be the ones whose loyalty is about something other than image management. A pause. For what it's worth, his investors called his firm at 7 this morning. 3 of them. My contact at the building says the calls were not supportive. Charlotte looked at her coffee cup. She waited for the satisfaction she expected to feel at that information and found something more complicated. Not sympathy for Preston, not exactly, but the absence of triumph. She had not wanted his destruction. She had wanted her own life back. Those were different wants, and the distinction mattered to her. "I don't want him ruined," she said. Damien looked at her. "I mean that. He was careless, and he was cruel, and he tried to burn down things that weren't his to burn." She held Damien's gaze. "But I don't want to spend the next 10 years of my life measuring my recovery against his destruction. That's not what this was for." Damien was quiet for a moment. Then, "What was it for?" She thought about it. Outside the window, Chicago was waking up on a Sunday, the particular slower rhythm of the city's day of rest, traffic thinner, the light different. "It was for the recording," she said, "for the version of me that set a takeout bag down outside an apartment door and walked to an elevator and chose herself before she even fully knew she was doing it." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "Everything after that has been about making that choice mean something." 3 weeks passed. They were not easy weeks, but they were real ones, which Charlotte had come to understand was the more valuable thing. The professional fallout from the Tribune piece moved through its natural trajectory. Her own workplace was supportive in the specific way of people who had read the same piece everyone else had and knew which side of the story had the receipts. The client project she had been building survived the noise entirely. The client, it turned out, had followed the story with the quiet attention of a person who judged character under pressure, and what they had seen was someone who did not flinch. They signed the agreement the Tuesday after the piece ran. Preston's company reported the departure of 2 board members within the week. His family issued no public statement. Catherine Reeves called Charlotte once, left a voicemail that said, only, "I'm glad you're okay," and nothing more. And Charlotte called her back and they had a 5-minute conversation that was the most honest exchange they had ever managed. Madison received a formal apology from her managing partner for the way the Preston phone call had been initially received, which she accepted with the specific graciousness of a woman who had already decided it was beneath her to be diminished by the incident. Elena Voss, in Amsterdam, sent Charlotte a brief email through Layla Okafor's contact channel. 3 sentences. She said she was sorry she had not known Charlotte while it was happening. She said she was glad it was over. She said she hoped the next chapter was better, for both of them. Charlotte read the email twice, and then replied with 2 sentences of her own, wished her well, and closed the thread. The night that things shifted, not dramatically, not with the velocity of everything that had preceded it, but with the slow, settling certainty of something finding its permanent level, was an ordinary Wednesday in December. Damien had been attempting to cook. This was a development that Charlotte had learned about only 3 weeks into whatever they were, When he told her flatly one evening that he had been attempting to teach himself to cook Italian food for 6 months, with results that he described as technically edible but emotionally dishonest. She had stared at him. He had produced a cookbook with several pages marked, and the expression of a man reporting a genuine occupational failure. She had laughed for the first time in a month. Now, on this Wednesday in December, he was attempting her mother's chicken marsala recipe, which she had texted him for reasons she still was not entirely sure she could account for, and which required a precision with the wine reduction that he was managing with the same intensity he brought to everything, brow slightly creased, jaw set, as if the reduction might attempt something tactical if he looked away. Charlotte was sitting on the kitchen counter, because the kitchen was small, and the stool put her at the wrong angle to properly monitor what he was doing, with a glass of wine and her laptop open to the client project work she had been finishing. The apartment was warm, the city was cold outside, and the first serious December snow was moving in, the sky a particular deep gray that promised accumulation. The smoke alarm went off. It was brief, a short, sharp chirp from a reduction that had gone slightly too fast on the heat, nothing burning, nothing ruined, just the alarm doing its job. Damien reached up and silenced it in one motion, turned the heat down, assessed the pan. "It's fine," he said, to Charlotte or to the pan, she wasn't certain. "It smells fine," she confirmed. "The ratio was off. The ratio is fine. You haven't tasted it. I can smell when a ratio is fine. I grew up with this recipe." She closed her laptop and set it aside, watching him tilt the pan slightly to assess the consistency of the reduction in the way of someone who was absolutely, completely going to get this right or die attempting. "Damien." "What?" "It's going to be good." He looked at her over his shoulder. The kitchen light was warm, his shirt sleeves turned back, a dish towel over one shoulder that he had picked up from the counter and deployed with complete unconscious practicality. He looked, Charlotte thought, like a man who was exactly where he was. "How do you know?" he said. "Because you don't do things badly when you decide to do them." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned back to the pan. 40 minutes later, they were sitting on the kitchen floor because the table was covered in the accumulated evidence of cooking: her laptop, the cookbook, 3 small bowls of prep work, a cutting board, and moving all of it had seemed like a project neither of them had the energy for. The food was on plates balanced on their knees, the wine within reach, the snow starting outside in soft silence against the windows. It was good. She told him so. He said the reduction was still slightly off. "Eat your food," she said. He ate his food. The snow came down outside, quiet and indifferent and beautiful, covering the city in the particular amnesty of a first December snow that made everything look temporarily clean. Charlotte ate her mother's recipe that a man had cooked from a text message she'd sent without fully knowing why, and thought about the distance between the woman who had left a takeout bag outside an apartment door 43 days ago and this woman, here, now, on a kitchen floor in the snow. The distance was not as large as she would have expected. That was the thing. She was recognizably the same person. Same hands, same hunger, same capacity for grief and stubbornness, and the specific kind of love that came with conditions attached. But the conditions were different now. She had renegotiated them, not with anyone else but with herself, in the weeks of wreckage and clarity that had followed one cold evening in November. She was not the woman who stayed quiet outside a door and walked away without a word anymore. She had been that woman, and she understood her, and she did not regret the walking away. But she was also not going back. "Tell me something," she said. Damien looked at her. A question. "Something you haven't told anyone," she said. "Not strategy, not history, just something." He was quiet for a moment. The snow came down outside. "I bought that painting," he said. She stared at him. "From the gallery, the piece with the wrong lighting." He held her gaze without flinching. "I went back the Monday after the gala, before I had any rational justification for it." He paused. "It's in a storage unit in River North. I haven't figured out where to put it yet." Charlotte looked at him. This man who had loved her from across a room for 3 years and bought a painting in the window of something he couldn't yet name and kept it in a storage unit while he waited for her to come to her own terms, and felt the last of the structural distance between them give way to something warmer and more permanent. North-facing windows, she said. I know that now. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. I'm working on it. She leaned her head back against the cabinet behind her, looking at the ceiling, and let herself feel, completely and without management, exactly where she was. The apartment was warm. The food was good. The snow fell outside without regard for any of them. Somewhere across the city, a man was learning the cost of mistaking convenience for love. Somewhere in Amsterdam, a woman was making her own terms. Somewhere in Lincoln Park, Madison Carter was probably already writing an extremely detailed account of the last 6 weeks in the journal she thought no one knew she kept. And here, on a kitchen floor in December, Charlotte Hayes was eating her own mother's recipe off a plate balanced on her knees. And the man beside her had one hand loose on his wine glass and the other resting on the floor between them, close enough that their knuckles touched. She didn't move her hand. Neither did he. The snow kept coming down over Chicago, quiet and full of the particular mercy of things that covered what needed covering without erasing what needed to remain. And the city that had watched all of it from its cold, luminous distance received the night without comment, the way cities received everything, with the deep accumulated patience of a place that had already seen every version of this story and knew, with the certainty of long witness, that some of them ended right. This one did, not perfectly. Not without cost, not without the scar tissue of decisions made under pressure and things withheld too long, and 3 years of a woman settling for a version of herself that fit inside someone else's limitations. But real. Fully, completely, accountably real. And for Charlotte Hayes, who had once stood outside a door on a cold November evening and chosen herself before she even knew she was doing it, real was more than enough. Real was everything.